off season and possibly playing or just doing individual workouts?
Yeah, I mean, probably take a little bit of a break here, just for maybe a week. I don't really want to lose a ton of the stuff I've worked on, and just trying to get my body back to full health. There's some USA basketball stuff I need to get.
They thought they could simply wipe her from the story, but they had no idea what kind of fury they were about to set loose. The decision to leave Caitlin Clark off the Team USA roster for the Summer Games was already the single most controversial move in the entire history of women's basketball. But fresh information has now come to the surface suggesting that the disrespect ran far deeper than a straightforward rejection. We are talking about a level of pettiness that is genuinely difficult to wrap your head around. Leaks from inside the selection process suggest that before the final door was shut in her face, there was an offer sitting on the table, one so deliberately insulting that it was practically engineered to be turned down. Rumors are circulating that league officials considered offering Clark a spot as a glorified alternate, but with a condition attached that struck right at the very core of her identity. They allegedly planned to strip her of her iconic number 22 and hand her jersey number 12. In the world of elite basketball, jersey numbers are never just digits. They are status symbols. Number 12 is widely recognized in hoops culture as the benchwarmer special, the jersey you throw to the last player on the roster simply to fill a seat. It was an offer so drenched in disrespect that it allegedly triggered a massive revolt behind the scenes, with players like Sophie Cunningham, an athlete celebrated for her fire and grit, reportedly stepping forward and refusing to play along with the league's dirty politics. This was not just a roster decision. It was a declaration of war against the new era. To understand why this jersey number rumor is such a bombshell, you have to understand the brand that Caitlin Clark has built. She is not just a player, she is an entire economy. The number 22 is synonymous with her name. It is on the backs of thousands of fans. It is etched into the record books, and it stands for the changing of the guard in women's sports. For the Team USA selection committee to allegedly suggest she wear number 12 was a calculated move to cut her brand down to size. It was a way of saying, "You are not the star here. You should feel lucky just to be in the room." This lines up perfectly with the gatekeeping narrative we have been watching unfold all season long. The established veterans, the old guard, have been fiercely resistant to handing over the keys to the kingdom. If Clark had accepted a spot wearing number 12, she would have been visually surrendering to the hierarchy, accepting her place as a backup to players like Diana Taurasi and Breanna Stewart. It would have been a living, breathing visual representation of the reality check Taurasi promised her before the season ever tipped off. But what the committee never anticipated was that other players in the league, players who have ground their way up from absolutely nothing, would see this moment for exactly what it was. Bullying dressed up in the costume of protocol. The shockwaves from this decision were immediate, but the arrival of Sophie Cunningham into this narrative changes the entire equation. Cunningham is a Phoenix Mercury standout, a player who has never once backed down from a confrontation and has frequently played the role of the villain in the eyes of opposing fans. She is tough, she is vocal, and she understands this game from the inside out. For her to allegedly take a stand against the treatment of Clark signals a massive and undeniable shift in the locker room dynamic. The media loves to construct the narrative of Caitlin Clark versus the WNBA, assuming that every veteran in the league despises the rookie. But Cunningham's reported frustration with the politics proves that a real faction of players exists who are completely fed up with the gatekeeping. They can read the writing on the wall. They understand that Clark is the rising tide that lifts every single boat. By treating the league's most valuable asset with such naked disrespect, offering her a scrub number and an alternate seat, the powers that be are gambling with the growth of the entire sport. If the rumors hold up and players are quietly protesting or refusing to participate in the national team's promotional machine because of this, it means the league has completely lost the locker room. But to truly feel the full weight of this insult, we have to walk through the timeline of the snub. When the roster was announced, the justifications offered by the committee were weak at best. They spoke about experience, seniority, and defensive chemistry. They insisted they needed players who had already been tested in the fires of international competition. Yet when you actually examine the statistics, when you stare at the sheer offensive production that Clark brings to the floor, every single one of those excuses collapses under pressure. The decision was personal. It was political. And the jersey number 12 rumor is the smoking gun that exposes it completely. It suggests they were prepared to include her, but only after they had humbled her first. They wanted her production without her spotlight. They wanted to sell tickets on the strength of her name while forcing her to ride the bench in a number that screams irrelevance. It is a classic hazing tactic, the kind of behavior you expect in a high school cafeteria, not at the absolute highest level of professional sport. And this is precisely why the backlash has been so overwhelming. The fans are not foolish. They can clearly distinguish between a basketball decision and a pure ego decision. The irony here is thick enough to cut straight through with a blade. For years, WNBA players have waged war for respect. They have fought for better salaries, for chartered flights, for meaningful media coverage. They have pleaded with the world to simply pay attention. And then finally, a player walks through the door who commands the attention of the entire globe. She sells out arenas from coast to coast. She shatters viewership records like they are made of glass. She moves merchandise at a pace this league has never once witnessed. And what does the establishment choose to do? They try to bury her. They try to stuff her into jersey number 12 and hide her away at the far end of the bench. It is a level of pure self-sabotage that has sports economists and marketing professionals absolutely pulling their hair out. The exclusion of Clark from the Olympics is estimated to have cost the league and the broadcast networks millions upon millions of dollars in potential revenue. And all of that for what? To protect the bruised feelings of a handful of veterans who are terrified of losing their place in the spotlight. The inclusion of Sophie Cunningham in the resistance against this decision makes it crystal clear that not everyone is willing to sink the entire ship just to spite the captain. Let's dig much deeper into the old guard mentality that poured gasoline on this fire. Diana Taurasi, a true legend of the game, has positioned herself as the face of this resistance. Her comments about a reality check coming were interpreted by many as a direct warning shot, a loud declaration that the veterans had zero intention of rolling out the red carpet for the rookie, and they have made good on every word of that promise. From hard fouls to media shade, the welcome wagon has been completely non-existent. The Olympic roster was supposed to be the ultimate meritocracy, the place where the best of the best come together to represent the nation. But by prioritizing seniority over current impact, the committee transformed Team USA into nothing more than a country club. They chose comfort over chaos. They knew perfectly well that if Clark was on that team, the entire media circus would follow right behind her. Every practice session, every game, every press conference would revolve entirely around her. And the veterans who have carried this league for a decade in relative obscurity clearly had no desire to share that stage with anyone. The jersey number insult was most likely a test. Will she submit? Will she quietly accept the scraps being offered to her? When the answer came back as silence, they cut her loose entirely. But silence is one of the most powerful weapons in existence, and Caitlin Clark has wielded it with absolute mastery. While the internet erupts with rage on her behalf, while pundits tear apart the fairness of the roster decision, and while rumors swirl about Sophie Cunningham refusing to play along with the charade, Clark has said almost nothing at all. She has not complained. She has not lashed out at anyone. She has simply put her head down and gone straight back to work. She is breaking assist records, posting triple-doubles, and proving every single night on that court that she is undeniably one of the greatest players in the world. Rookie label or not, this silence drives her critics absolutely out of their minds. They want her to crack under the pressure. They want her to behave like an entitled star so they can turn around and use it to justify every terrible thing they have done to her. But by consistently taking the high road, she shines a blinding spotlight on just how deeply petty the league's actions truly are. If she had publicly complained about being offered jersey number 12, they would have labeled her a diva without a second thought. By ignoring the whole thing and locking back in on basketball, she exposes them for exactly what they are. The bullies. The role of Sophie Cunningham in this entire saga simply cannot be overstated. We tend to view sports through the narrow lens of individual rivalries, but the real story underneath is almost always about alliances. Cunningham represents the grinder mentality of the WNBA in its purest form. She is not a media darling. She fights tooth and nail for every single inch of respect she has ever earned. If the reports are accurate and she is genuinely disgusted by the way Clark was treated, it validates the feelings of millions upon millions of fans who feel the exact same fury. It proves that this is not just wild fan theories being cooked up on the internet. It demonstrates that inside the walls of the league itself, there is a growing recognition that things have gone entirely too far. The refusal to play narrative may not mean she is literally sitting out games on principle, but it points to something deeper, a spiritual boycott of the hazing culture that has taken root. It is a refusal to be complicit in the systematic destruction of a once-in-a-generation talent. It sends a direct and unmistakable message straight to the league office. We are watching everything, and we do not like a single thing we see. We also have to have an honest conversation about the selection committee itself. Who exactly are these people, and why do they feel so completely comfortable making decisions that appear to actively damage the growth of the sport they claim to love? The committee is composed of former players, coaches, and administrators, individuals deeply embedded in the WNBA's long history. They are the gatekeepers of this game. They view the national team as a reward handed out for years of loyal service, a gold watch presented at the end of a long career. They do not see it as a marketing vehicle or as a living showcase of the very best current talent available. This massive disconnect between the old-school basketball purists and the cold hard business reality is what caused this entire train wreck to happen. They genuinely believed they could leave Clark off the roster and the world would simply nod its head and say, "Fine, she needs to wait her turn like everyone else." They could not have misread the room more catastrophically if they had tried. They failed to grasp that for this entire new wave of fans pouring into arenas and tuning in from everywhere, Caitlin Clark is the WNBA. Leaving her at home is the exact equivalent of booking a sold-out concert and then telling the headliner to wait alone in the parking lot. And what about the jersey number itself? Why does number 12 cut so deeply and sting so badly? In the psychology of sports, numbers are not accessories, they are identity itself. Michael Jordan is 23. Wayne Gretzky is 99. Caitlin Clark is 22. To offer her any other number at all is already an attempt to strip her of who she is. But to specifically offer her a number that is universally associated with the end of the bench is an entirely different and far more sinister form of psychological warfare. It says you are replaceable. It is a microaggression executed on the largest possible macro stage. It is exactly the kind of thing that plants a chip on a player's shoulder so deep and so permanent that it lasts an entire lifetime. If this rumor is true, the committee did not simply make a roster decision. They created an absolute monster. They handed Clark every single drop of motivation she will ever need to go out and shatter every record this sport has ever known. And when she eventually does make that Olympic team 4 years down the road, you can be completely certain that she will be the one sitting at the head of the table dictating the terms, not them. The fallout has been a full-blown public relations nightmare for USA basketball. They have been forced to field questions about Clark at literally every single turn. The players who did earn spots on the team, incredible and accomplished athletes in their own right, have had their moment completely stolen by the ghost of the player who was never there. Every single time the team struggled or looked slow and disconnected, the internet detonated with comments flooding in from every direction saying things like Caitlin would have threaded that pass or Clark would have buried that shot without blinking. The enormous shadow of the snub hung over every moment of the entire tournament from start to finish. By desperately trying to eliminate the so-called distraction of Caitlin Clark, they manufactured a distraction 10 times larger and 10 times louder than anything she could have ever created by simply being there. They wanted the world to focus on the team, but instead they made the entire global conversation about the one singular person who was not on it. It was a strategic failure of absolutely epic and historically embarrassing proportions. Then you have the rumors of deep internal conflict brewing beneath the surface. If players like Sophie Cunningham are genuinely pushing back hard against the establishment, it points to a very real fracturing of the WNBA sisterhood. For a very long time, the league operated as a tight and fiercely loyal unit. Us against the entire world. But now, with serious money flowing in and unprecedented levels of attention flooding the sport, the cracks are beginning to split wide open. There are the haves and the have-nots. There are the players who are riding the Clark boom to greater visibility and financial opportunity, and there are the players who resent every second of it. The jersey number 12 incident is almost certainly just the very tip of a much larger and far more dangerous iceberg lurking just beneath the surface. It is a symptom of a much larger and far more poisonous disease, and that disease is envy. It is genuinely painful to watch someone walk through the door and collect in 10 minutes everything you ground and scraped and sacrificed 10 long years of your life to earn. That is raw human nature at its most exposed and most ugly. But it is the responsibility of the league to manage those egos with a firm and steady hand, not to coddle them and indulge every petty impulse. The league failed that responsibility completely. They let the inmates take full control of the asylum, and the result was a public relations disaster that will echo for years to come. Let's pause for a moment and truly consider the fan perspective. The Caitlyn cult, as her detractors so mockingly label them, are not simply casual viewers flipping channels on a slow afternoon. They are ferociously and almost frighteningly loyal. When the news of the Jersey insult leaked out into the open, it was the precise equivalent of throwing an entire can of gasoline directly onto a roaring fire. Fans immediately began canceling subscriptions, returning merchandise by the armful, and flooding every corner of social media with furious demands for real accountability. They feel deeply and personally protective of Clark because they see her as the ultimate underdog despite her absolute dominance on the court. They see a young woman being deliberately targeted by a jealous and threatened establishment, and they are rallying to her defense with everything they have. This is precisely why the Sophie Cunningham angle adds such a stunning and electric dimension to this story. It hands the fans a genuine ally on the inside of the walls. It tells them directly, "You are not crazy." Even the players themselves think this whole situation is completely messed up. It validates every ounce of the anger. It builds a powerful and emotionally charged narrative of the people versus the powerful. Sophie Cunningham and Caitlyn Clark standing together against the entrenched establishment. And that is an extraordinarily compelling story to tell, but we still have to honestly ask the question, was there ever a single legitimate basketball reason buried somewhere underneath all of this for the snub? The committee pointed specifically to Clark's turnover rate and her relative lack of defensive experience at the international level. And yes, taken in complete isolation, those are technically valid critiques to level at a rookie entering her first professional season. But are they truly valid enough to justify leaving behind the single most electric and captivating scorer the world of women's basketball has ever produced? Are they genuinely substantial enough to look the other way and ignore the undeniable and breathtaking chemistry she generates with her passing vision alone? The overwhelming majority of serious analysts say absolutely not. There were players who earned spots on that roster who played significantly fewer minutes and delivered measurably less impact than Clark would have brought to every single moment of every game. The basketball justifications feel like nothing more than a carefully constructed shield being held up to conceal far more personal and far more uncomfortable reasons lurking right behind it. The jersey number 12 offer, if it holds up as truth, is ironclad proof that the committee considered her talent more than sufficient to warrant a place on the team. They simply did not want her brand anywhere near the team. They wanted her as a quiet backup, a subdued and anonymous participant sitting at the end of the bench, not as the undeniable main event that she has already become. And the moment it became painfully obvious that she was far too large a figure to ever be made small, they cut her loose without a second glance. The long-term consequences of all of this are going to be absolutely fascinating to watch unfold. How will this entire ugly episode affect the next generation of young players watching from the sidelines? Will they look at how Clark was treated and seriously think twice before committing their careers to the WNBA? Will they internalize the brutal lesson that even if you are objectively the best player on the planet, you are still required to navigate the dirty minefield of league politics just to survive? Or will this moment ignite something far more powerful? Will we begin to see a wave of players following Sophie Cunningham's example, standing up with their voices and refusing to be silenced and pushed around by the old guard? We are arguably sitting ringside watching the slow and painful death of the old WNBA and the equally painful and messy birth of something completely new. The gatekeepers are gripping those gates with white-knuckle desperation, but the force of this new era is simply too overwhelming and too unstoppable to be held back by trembling hands. Caitlyn Clark is coming for everything, and it does not matter in the slightest whether they like it or not. The financial dimension of this whole situation remains the single most baffling and bewildering piece of the entire puzzle. The WNBA is, at its fundamental core, a business operation. Its primary purpose and its driving goal is to generate revenue and grow. Caitlyn Clark is a living and breathing money-printing machine unlike anything this sport has ever encountered. By choosing to alienate her, by deliberately disrespecting her with the humiliating jersey swap offer, the league is essentially pouring gasoline on stacks of cash and striking a match without flinching. The Olympic Games represent a global showcase seen by billions of eyes around the world. It was a once-in-a-generation opportunity to introduce the entire planet to the undisputed future of women's basketball. Instead, they presented the world with the past. They rolled out a roster that looked identical to the team that took the floor 4 years prior. They squandered a golden and irreplaceable opportunity to transform millions of casual Olympic viewers' browsing channels into passionate and committed lifelong WNBA fans. Marketing 101, taught in every first-year business class on Earth, states with absolute clarity that you place your very best and most compelling product directly in the front window for the world to see. Team USA Selection Committee made the baffling and historically short-sighted choice to lock their best and most marketable product away in the warehouse because they did not personally approve of the way it was packaged. And we absolutely cannot overlook the immense and suffocating pressure this decision placed squarely on the shoulders of every player who did accept a jersey and step onto that floor. They are now performing under a microscope with the intensity of 1,000 burning suns focused on their every move. Every single mistake is magnified to an almost unbearable degree. If Team USA had fallen short and lost, the blame would have landed with crushing weight directly on the heads of the selection committee and no one else. But even in the scenario of winning, they managed to lose the public relations war so completely and so thoroughly that the victory itself felt hollow. The dominant narrative was never Team USA claims gold in triumphant fashion. The dominant narrative, the one that consumed every conversation, was Team USA wins gold. But just imagine what it could have looked like if Caitlin was standing right there beside them. That is the deep and lasting tragedy buried at the heart of this situation. The genuine greatness of the players who did make that roster is being permanently overshadowed and obscured by the thundercloud of controversy surrounding the snub. The veterans fought and clawed for that spotlight to belong entirely to themselves. But by making the deliberate choice to exclude Clark, they guaranteed that the spotlight would never be able to shine on them fully or without interruption. It is a paradox they constructed entirely with their own hands and their own decisions. Now let us bring the focus back squarely to Sophie Cunningham. Her reported refusal to participate in the game, whether that refusal is understood metaphorically or taken at face value, stands as a clear and ringing signal of genuine integrity in a situation sorely lacking it. It is effortless and comfortable to drift along with the crowd. It costs absolutely nothing to pile on the rookie simply because everyone around you is already doing it. What takes real and rare courage is the willingness to plant your feet, look the room in the eye, and say out loud and without flinching, "This is wrong and I will not be part of it." If the rumors surrounding her defiance prove to be accurate, she deserves an enormous and unqualified amount of credit and respect. She is living proof that you can be an intensely fierce and committed competitor without allowing yourself to become a hater. You can want desperately to beat Caitlin Clark on the court with every fiber of your competitive being without ever feeling the need to humiliate and diminish her off of it. That distinction is the very soul of true sportsmanship, a quality the selection committee appears to have misplaced somewhere along the way and never bothered to retrieve. As we turn our eyes forward toward the future, the central question that refuses to go away remains exactly the same. Will the WNBA be capable of learning anything meaningful from this catastrophic misstep? Will they finally arrive at the recognition that they cannot wage a war against the tidal wave of popularity and cultural relevance that Caitlin Clark brings crashing in with her every single time she steps on the floor? Or will they continue to dig their heels into the ground with stubborn and self-defeating resistance? The jersey number 12 saga will almost certainly be recorded in the history books as one of the most spectacular and consequential unforced errors in the entire history of sports management. It was the precise moment when ego stepped up to the podium and drowned out every voice of logic and reason in the room, but it also accomplished something the committee never once intended. It galvanized and unified a fan base with a passion and intensity that no marketing campaign could ever manufacture or buy. It proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that Caitlin Clark is infinitely bigger than any jersey number they could ever assign her. You can dress her in number 12, number 50, or number 99. It does not matter in the slightest. Her game speaks with a volume and authority that drowns out their politics without even trying. And as for Sophie Cunningham and every other player with the conscience and the backbone to refuse to accept the disrespect, history will remember exactly which side of this moment they chose to stand on. The truth of the matter is that this story is nowhere close to being finished. The tension crackling between the old guard and the surging new generation will define the texture and the identity of the next several seasons of WNBA basketball. Every single time Clark steps onto the floor across from Taurasi or Stewart, this snub will be the invisible but unmistakable subtext burning underneath every exchange. Every time Sophie Cunningham takes the court and competes, fans across the country will look at her and remember her as the one who had the courage to stand up loudly and clearly for what was right when it would have been so much easier to stay silent. The league reached desperately for control of the narrative, but they surrendered that control permanently the instant they decided to play petty political games with jersey numbers. They set out to humble a rookie and deliver her a lesson in deference. Instead, they ended up holding a mirror directly in front of their own faces and exposing every insecurity they had spent years carefully hiding. And that is the kind of stain that no amount of spin, no carefully worded press release, and no choreographed media moment will ever fully wash away. So where exactly does the road go from here? The fans have already made their voices heard with a clarity that cannot be misunderstood or dismissed. The engagement numbers tell a story that no executive can spin away into comfortable irrelevance. The videos and discussions dedicated to the snub are generating more views, more comments, and more passionate debate than the actual Olympic competition highlights themselves. That single fact alone tells you everything you will ever need to know about where the hearts and minds of the people truly are. They care deeply about fairness. They care with genuine passion about respect. And they care with an almost religious intensity about seeing the best players in the world actually get the opportunity to play. The WNBA is standing at a crossroads, and the choice sitting in front of them could not be more stark or more consequential. Adapt with courage and vision, or fade slowly and painfully into irrelevance. You cannot lay the foundation of a bold and exciting future while your hands are wrapped in a white-knuckled death grip around the crumbling remnants of a past that no longer serves you. The jersey number 12 insult was a desperate and transparent last-gasp attempt to preserve a hierarchy that has already ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Caitlin Clark has blown the ceiling completely off this sport, and no amount of gatekeeping, no roster maneuvering, and no petty number games can ever reassemble the pieces. In the end, perhaps this was the single greatest thing that could have possibly happened for Caitlin Clark and her legacy. It gave her exactly what every champion needs most. It gave her a break.